Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Alex.
You are?
Hi,
here.
Alex, you're here. Good. Glad to have you here. And also, we have a very special guest. Dr. Sarina Thoendel is joining us from Lilyhaven.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Before we jump into the main topic of our conversation, it'd be great to get to know you, let our listeners know who you are a little bit. So just tell us who you are, what you do.
Yeah. I'm the executive director of Lilyhaven, like you said. I went to Creighton University for occupational therapy. So that's kind of my professional background. Just love working with people, and then have been with the organization since I was a student. So really have done just about every little odd job within the organization, and now get to lead and direct it with the help of some other great people.
Great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, yeah, what we're talking about today, obviously, maybe not obvious. We haven't told you what this is. Maybe if you read the title, is just trafficking. And specifically, we'll talk more about just those who are younger and being trafficked, and maybe some of the tropes that our listeners have, or that even we have around this idea. What trafficking really is, I think, is something to start there, because in social media and just in our world, I think it's a word that we hear, or sex slaves, all those kind of things are maybe language or vernacular we've heard, but maybe not everyone totally understands it. So could you just tell us a little bit so we understand and have the right framework for the conversation, what trafficking is, and really what you guys are focusing on at Lilyhaven?
Yeah, it's always good to start with definition, because like you said, it's used or almost like traded for different words sometimes that maybe it's not exactly the right fit. The general definition that goes for adults is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain a sex or labor act. With children, it's different because they cannot consent to like commercial sex. So that looks like, I actually wrote down child under 18, 19 in Nebraska, advertised, solicited, or exploited for commercial sex. And really simply put, what that definition would be is if a minor trades something of value for sex. So it doesn't have to be money. It could be a place to stay. It could be transportation, food. So that helped clarify things a lot for me, of like that simpler definition. Yeah.
So that would define trafficking. I guess when I hear the word trafficking, I assume there is someone who is responsible for tracking that individual, or trafficking that individual. So can that also just be applied to someone who is kind of on their own doing this?
Yeah,
Okay.
That's actually a really good question. I feel like a lot of people don't catch that. There can be different kinds. So unfortunately, it could happen within someone's family. So that would be what's categorized as like familial trafficking. But then a youth could be on their own, which we'll get to kind of some of those risks and things later. But if they were, let's say, homeless and to have a place to stay, they were trading sex for a place to stay, but there wasn't necessarily someone over them making that happen. It could be on their own, or there could be that person that we call the trafficker, who is kind of organizing, orchestrating, connecting with the youth and with buyers. So it could look a couple different ways. Yeah.
I think even to Alex's point about what we hear on social media, I mean, obviously things like the Epstein files and things like this, it's really popularized what captivating people's imagination is maybe a light way of saying it, but I think people do wonder, like, okay, on one hand, we heard all these conspiracy theories that could never be true, but then stuff like that starts to come out and you're like, okay, well, maybe there's more validity to this. Or so what, like in the realm of from extreme to reality, like how do we really classify what's actually going on in trafficking?
Yeah. No, I think that's great of what you mentioned of like our mind draws conclusions whether or not that's right. And sometimes it's filled in by things that aren't necessarily true, like movies or books or different things that, again, not to say that situations like that don't happen, but more often than not, what trafficking looks like is a lot more relational. Some of those big myths that it requires kidnapping or that it requires someone moving across a border. Again, those things can happen, but those two characteristics aren't required for it to be trafficking. Again, with youth, it's a little different, that there doesn't have to be that force, fraud, or coercion, but there still often is force, fraud, or coercion within that.
Yeah.
And to break that down too, of like, what does coercion look like? What does fraud look like? What is, obviously force could be physical force, or even just the threat of force or the threat of harm. So it's a lot more psychologically complex than we think.
Yeah, and like Eric alluded to, things that are big that are out there, like the Epstein files, like, well, there's no private islands in Omaha, right? Like why are we having this conversation? Why is there, why do people like you exist in a place like Omaha, right? We're Nebraska, we're the good old state and all that kind of stuff. Help us understand maybe what's not true about, the heartland and how trafficking actually works here, especially with younger people, that maybe we don't want to face those realities.
Yeah, I think before talking about what it looks like, we'll talk about what the risks are, because for me, I don't know, those were like the building blocks that helped me see the fuller picture of like, why would someone be trafficked? Because like you said, it's like, well, people aren't getting kidnapped, so it's not happening here. And it's like, okay, if we realize that it's not through kidnapping, then how is it? And what does that look like?
Yeah.
So when we think about the risks, it's things really that put someone in a vulnerable space. So things that are risk factors for other traumas too, like addiction. But when you think about vulnerability, so it could be someone who's in a low income or impoverished family or community, someone who has domestic violence or other kind of abuse in the home. Maybe it's not happening to them, but they're witnessing it. Addiction within the home or personal addiction themselves. Really anyone who is isolated. And I think that that's the common thread through some of those different things that you would see as a risk factor, is like, oh, why would that be a risk, right? And really when I think about it and have gotten to know people, it's, okay, well, it can put them in a situation where they feel isolated, where they aren't getting maybe the attention that they feel. We all need attention, right? We all need that connection. I even think about just maybe it's someone who comes from like a single parent household and their parent works multiple jobs. And so they're just left at home a lot. And again, that doesn't mean anything negative about that person's parent, but that leaves a lot of void for someone to form a connection with someone. And maybe because their parent's so busy, they're not noticing some of those red flags. So again, anyone who has a need, whether that be tangible like food, shelter, or is it that attention need, right? So those are those things that could be exploited upon. And then that is really the next step of like, how does that happen? So someone might meet a youth, since we're talking about youth, and again, form that relationship. So it might not immediately look like trafficking. Maybe they met them online, they decide to meet in person, and it's a maybe older man that meets a younger girl. They form a relationship, it's friendly, maybe they start giving them gifts and giving them that attention, getting to know them, know some of their struggles, know the things that they like. And then that is what's exploited upon, right? So that trust is built, and then that is exploited, or maybe they start to fill some of those needs. So maybe they take them places, they spend time together, they feel special. And then ultimately maybe they turn around and it's, okay, you're going to do this thing for me, or maybe even for us, right? Like they form such a bond with the victim, and they say, okay, now to provide for us, you're going to do this thing. And so to me, that makes it easier for me to see how somebody could fall victim to it without necessarily like flashing lights going off, right?
Yeah. So when we hear the term grooming, is that essentially what you're describing there?
Right. Yeah. Like that long game of pouring attention into someone and helping them feel comfortable with a person. It's hard to say, oh, they feel comfortable, because we don't want that.
But it kind of creates a codependence, or
right,
like maybe even guilt for thinking they shouldn't be involved in this relationship
Right.
because this person needs them or something like that. Yeah.
Or they owe them something too
yeah.
of, again, oh, you provided for me. You gave me this thing when I was experiencing hard trauma or neglect within my own home. This person came in from the outside. So yeah, feeling like they owe it to them.
Yeah, which seems like, I mean, in a way, like Stockholm syndrome, right? Where you are the victim in the situation, all of a sudden feels like they're responsible for the person that is the perpetrator or the person that is doing the wrong. And it seems like that probably shows up in a lot of those situations, especially when grooming is, I don't want to use the words done right, but when grooming happens and you build that bond and you build that and gaslighting, I'm sure happens, all of those types of things inside of this. And so, yeah, that's interesting. And are there other ways, like, I guess recruitment happens outside of grooming? Is this usually like adult to child? Is this ever peer to peer or kind of what are the specifics around who might be the groomers?
Yeah. Well, and I think before I move on to, I don't want to forget just what you mentioned of the like Stockholm syndrome type of feelings is that someone might not always identify as, and I would say not always, probably more often than not, someone doesn't necessarily identify as a victim. They're not going to be walking down the street looking at every person for help because they might not know that what they're going through isn't normal. And again, they might truly care about the person that's trafficking them, even though that we would look at that from the outside and be like, whoa, this isn't a healthy, age-appropriate relationship.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that grooming can take place from people that they meet online. It could be someone that they meet through a family friend who takes an interest in them. But like you mentioned, it could be peer-to-peer, right? Like it doesn't have to be someone older, especially if that person who is their peer, again, forms a relationship, sees a way to exploit them. And maybe they don't realize right off the bat, too, that they're doing something, but they kind of form that like power and control cycle.
So when we're talking, maybe this falls back into the definition of trafficking, but in the scenario that you've described, is that always, it might not always be the person that's trafficking someone is also arranging for them to have sexual encounters with other people. It might just be for their own benefit.
Right, survival almost, right? Yeah. So if we think about youth who are at risk, 1 in 7 youth who are have a missing report are likely to be trafficked. And so if you think about a youth who's running away from home, who maybe is in and out of like the shelter system, again, they could meet someone on their own and I don't want to say willingly, but seemingly willingly gives a sex act for a place to stay or transportation that no one necessarily organized for them, but that would still be considered trafficking.
Yeah.
That's helpful. I'm curious how the internet plays a role in this. I mean, obviously there's good things in the internet, you know, like the X movement and End It and things like that are trying to push push ending it and bring awareness. But how do things like even this week, I think the CEO and founder of OnlyFans died, and that made the news, obviously. But so how does the internet like shape the potential for trafficking, where it's not like, I'm not giving you to a client, quote unquote, in a physical way, but through, you know, websites and things like that. Are those things real, or are they myth, or what happens there?
Oh yeah, that's its own like whole can of worms, and so many other things that can unfortunately happen there. I think it's, like we discussed, a place for people to potentially meet someone who grooms them, and then they move toward meeting in person. And that could happen through social media, chat rooms, online gaming. And then you already kind of hit on that piece of all of the ability to look at sex online and sell sex online. And then again, someone could decide to meet them in person. another big thing that this isn't considered trafficking, but very adjacent and just still goes along with the education piece and the importance of that is like the online sextortion. And so that could be someone scamming. Well, again, we'll go back to youth, but someone who forms a relationship with a youth online and then builds this friendship and maybe sends them fake nude images and asks for them in return and then goes to use that against them of, okay, now you're going to send me money and makes those threats. So a very real danger that we're seeing a lot of. And so, again, while that's not considered trafficking, it's very close and it's some of those same tactics. So I think it's going to be an ever-changing thing of how it looks like in different tactics that people are using. And so it's always going to be important for us to be aware of those things and to stay educated and to talk to people about how do you stay safe online and what do you do if someone's asking you for those things, and talking to youth of, okay, if you did send an image, you can still be honest with an adult. You can still, it is still not your fault for someone having solicited that from you, and still just making sure that they feel like they can go to someone that they trust without fear of being in trouble right away. Because obviously it's a very shameful thing. And
I've definitely seen a handful of headlines around that where, youth have been subjected to that and it's led to suicide or other things. Because I think they do feel trapped. Like,
100%.
Okay, this person's threatening to reveal these photos to my friends and family. And if I don't, whatever, I don't have the money to pay this. So I have to tell my parents now. And like, they're kind of trapped in this scenario. And I think a parent would hear that and kind of go, oh my goodness, please just tell me if that's happening. Like, you know, but
absolutely.
What does that look like? Or what maybe would surprise parents about these types of scenarios that could be happening because it is online. It's so instantaneous. The camera app's built right into the messaging system, so it's right there.
Yeah.
And I think a kid could get so wrapped up into it so quick. How do they feel safe to go to parents? What should parents be talking to their kids about?
It's like obviously fitting for the podcast of it's uncomfortable, but so important. I think starting those conversations as early as you can, but even if you haven't had those conversations, like it's never too late. I think what's important is like when you have that conversation of hopefully starting it when you're in a good mood, when there isn't already conflict ongoing, so that there's just that trust built in. And for parents or caregivers, really just to emphasize that like their goal is safety. It's not to make the kid's life boring and not be able to connect with people and all of those things, but really to ultimately protect their safety and know that there's people out there that don't have their best interest. And so finding what for each family, it's going to look different of what those rules are and how they create those boundaries. But I think open conversations and acknowledging that it's uncomfortable too. I think pretending that it's not uncomfortable and pretending like if something were to happen that it would be easy for someone to come to their parent and admit what they've done. And maybe even offering too of like, oh, if you don't feel comfortable to come tell me, who else is in our life that we trust that like you could go to and talk to them about this and maybe then come back to me as a parent and then we have this conversation. So really finding out whatever that is for each youth. And again, looking for those signs of like, okay, if someone asks you these things, like pause, don't be afraid to stop responding to them. And like, you're not responsible for protecting someone's feelings that you've never met. Maybe you think you've formed this relationship with them. And I think important for parents too, to acknowledge that how someone could create a relationship online. I think it's easy looking from the outside to be like, oh, how could you not see that person wasn't real or didn't have your best interest? But I think reminding youth that like they're developing, they're still learning, and we all make mistakes. And so just trying to come from a point of understanding, and understanding doesn't necessarily mean that you approve of what could or couldn't happen, but just trying to be as open.
Yeah. I mean, I, grew up and just had to watch out for free candy vans in my neighborhood. That was kind of, that's the bad thing. And I mean, my parents, and I didn't grow up with my parents teaching me about, the dangers or potential pitfalls online and so on and so forth. And so as a parent, like it just takes time and research. And I think sometimes people go to two extremes. They're just like, we're just going to ignore it all. And then we're going to act like it's not there. You're never going to have a device, never going to connect it to the internet. And I'm going to protect you in that way. And, that extreme, I think, leads to not actually parenting through it. And then a kid gets into high school, or I mean, you can do that with whatever, alcohol, whatever. If you don't have the difficult conversations with your kid about reality, then when they discover it, I think there's more
they could still be
vulnerabilities
vulnerable as a young adult. Just because they've graduated high school doesn't mean that someone's not still at risk. And so, I think that's important of like, acknowledge that it's hard and uncomfortable, and it doesn't all have to be said at one time either. Like, I think there could be that pressure of, okay, we're going to have one conversation, but it's like, if you hit on one small piece at a time, like that can still be valuable. And, asking them questions too of like, oh, what do you see going on? What do you see in this? Or what sites are you on? What do you want to be on? What's the goal of that? Like, trying to understand them too can help of just creating that openness.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I was just curious. So we already touched on this a little bit. Like, this stuff doesn't happen in Omaha, that happens overseas. It happens on private islands, all those kinds of things. And we've talked about how oftentimes, the victim knows whoever's exploiting them. Sometimes it's family, maybe sometimes it's a trusted friend, family member. I mean, a lot of abuse, especially even without trafficking attached to it, happens. The perpetrator is someone that's close, unfortunately, which kind of makes it scary. And it's not these overly dramatic, embellished, like what we see in movie type situations. Usually it's a lot more close to home. But what are the other maybe myths that culture or movies or Hollywood help us believe about how this does happen and how it doesn't happen?
Yeah, I think one that can be common is it happens in big cities or only developing countries, or it's always somewhere else of like, well, Omaha's not that big, so we must be safe from it. And really all of that is a myth of it can happen anywhere, right? So we talked about what makes a person vulnerable. Unfortunately, there is someone with a vulnerability everywhere. Yeah. Small towns, big cities, developing, super urban, doesn't really matter because someone can have vulnerabilities and be taken advantage of. And someone could have none of those vulnerabilities. They could have a really great home life and still fall victim to someone, again, like pouring into them and manipulating them. Yeah. So it's an unfortunate fact, right, that it could happen anywhere. But I think for me, what I feel passionate about is that education piece, because it's like, if I don't want to use the word afraid, but if we are aware of the right things, if we're not not afraid of all of these myths, it can just help us like put our attention and our efforts toward the right things, right? Yeah. So if we know what to look out for, we can spend time talking about it, and we can spend time looking for some of those vulnerability. Maybe if it's a teacher or a coach, they could spot some of those things that could make someone vulnerable. So it's like, oh, maybe you don't have all of these resources at home. How can we get a kid plugged into some of these things from a safe adult, a safe resource, a safe community, so that they're not likely to need it from someone else who doesn't have the best intentions. So like I said, while some of these statistics at times can be hard because it's like, oh, that's overwhelming. That's worse, knowing that anybody could be trafficked. Anybody could meet someone online. It happens everywhere. There's so many cases. At the same time, again, if we know how it happens, we can be better prepared, have better conversations, look out for things better. But yeah, I think that's another myth of like, it always has to be kidnapping. It always has to be someone brought from state to state. And then that myth, like we talked about, of like, a person would know right away and tell a teacher or tell an adult if it was happening. Like, that's not always the case.
Yeah.
But knowing that too, it can help us as adults who have some sort of influence in youth's lives to ask the right questions too, of like, oh, okay, if you have this new friend or this new boyfriend, like asking questions and kind of trying to hear for some of those things of like, oh, okay, I'm hearing you met online, or like, oh, you suddenly have another phone, or you suddenly have this really nice bag, but you're not really willing to share where you got it. Like just paying attention to some of those things, because sometimes we're not always going to ask that direct question of like, well, did you meet online and did he ask you XYZ? Because maybe they wouldn't be willing to tell us right away. So it's like maybe listening for the answers to those questions without necessarily having to ask it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one of the books we've discussed on the podcast before was a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And one of the things that he mentions is how in the 80s and 90s there was a lot of fear built up around just kidnapping in general.
Oh yeah, I was
like,
afraid of that as a
kid.
kid.
You can't, like, your parents wouldn't, and it led to parents like, my generation of parenting is don't let your kids outside, don't let them, go anywhere by themselves, don't, and he kind of would argue that that's kind of stolen some of the youth from the current generation of children because they haven't had that freedom to explore and to explore their neighborhoods with their friends and do that stuff because parents are so protective now of kind of this boogeyman scenario of there's evil in every bush and every shadow we need to watch out for. And I wonder, how do some of those myths kind of play into how people parent or have these conversations? I mean, even when it comes to the age of minors that get trafficked, like where do we see kind of a range of that, or like real young kids susceptible to being kidnapped and trafficked, or is that more of a myth?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, it can happen in so many different ways. Statistics too can be difficult just because not everybody makes reports, and reports can take time and prosecution can take time. One of the stronger statistics that I have seen is that the average age is 15 years old.
Okay.
We've gotten referrals for youth younger than that. But I would say that's probably around a common like 13 to 15 where maybe those relationships are being formed. I mean, again, there is still so much value in education on how do we form relationships with someone rather than like, oh, stranger danger, don't talk to strangers, but who is worthy and safe to create that relationship with. And yeah, I mean, that again, that's not to say that it's not happening to younger youth, especially if we're seeing like that familial trafficking. So it really can look a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And I know as recent as I saw in August of 2025, there was a huge ring in Omaha that was busted, that was running out of motels, and 10 children under the age of 12 were found, and the 27 victims were a part of that in August 12th, 2025, and 10 of them were under the age of 12 when they found them. And so again, like that stuff.
Yeah, and I want to say, if I'm thinking of the same case, and it can be really common of like an overlap with labor trafficking of, okay, maybe they're like working for a family business. And I want to say in that case with the hotels and motels of like, oh, there was an expectation for them to be cleaning. But then also they were sold for sex within the hotels. And so there can be a lot of those overlapping things, again, like very complex, hard to pull apart.
Says the violations were around conspiracy to engage in labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and harboring illegal aliens inside several of the locations. So like you said, it probably was so intertwined between any of those things. Yeah. People are like, humans are a commodity and they help me get more money or drugs were a part of this, and so many different things.
Yeah. And I think important, I didn't touch on all of the risks earlier, but a lot of youth who are in the foster care system or youth and just adults in general who are immigrants that might be more willing to work in situations that they're not sure are the best work environments because they need a job, or they're, again, maybe more willing to put up with something for the fear of just needing a job in general, needing that income. And so it's, again, populations that are already unfortunately taken advantage of, who are just sometimes more easily exploited because they have more needs that can be manipulated on. Yeah.
So help us understand the actual warning signs, and if parents or family or friends or whatever start to see these, what can we do? How can we tangibly help people in this situation?
Yeah. We hit on a couple of them already, but like if someone suddenly has a bunch of valuable resources, maybe it's clothes, shoes, bags, maybe they have a second phone all of a sudden, again, to like communicate with people. Youth who run away from home, so youth who have a lot of missing reports, it can be a huge red flag, just because, again, that creates the space and opportunity. And so asking those questions, that's obviously more on the side of like law enforcement and professionals who might be working with youth who have those runaway and missing reports. But that's a big indicator for them to say, what are they maybe running away from at home, or what are they running to? And it can oftentimes be both, right? Like maybe their home situation isn't great, so they're more likely to be running away to someone, begin using drugs and alcohol. If we're thinking about youth who maybe is in school, or maybe they're in our youth group, or maybe it's a youth that we coach, like are there suddenly all these absences and ultimately just like changed behavior? If it's like, oh, you used to be this really bubbly, outgoing, would show up for every event, but now you're not here, you're late. Or if it's a youth that it's like maybe they're sleeping all day in school, grouchier, more closed off, just some of those things that it's like, maybe that doesn't indicate trafficking, but it probably indicates that something's going on, right? So just changed behavior. And then, if they suddenly have a new group of friends and they're maybe unwilling to share information about them, that, again, maybe that's a hint or a sign that something probably isn't going on that's totally right. Because if it's this new group of friends that is healthy and positive, parents are probably going to meet them. They're probably going to see their families, talk to them. Their kids are probably going to be excited. So I think youth typically have an understanding too of like, oh, if my parent doesn't like these people that I'm hanging out with, I'm not going to tell them. So again, going back to like that relationship can run deep even when they know that it might not be the healthiest.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And how do we, like, I've got, 4 kids and 3 daughters that are 11 and under. So how do we like have these conversations without like creating fear either, like that? Because I think even what we talked about, you're scared of getting kidnapped, just if I get too far away from mom and dad, if I can't see their eyes at the park, this guy's going to show up in his van, he's going to grab me, throw a trash bag on my head, and I'm never going to see my parents again. I mean, I think sometimes parents like drove like a fear-based and out of wanting to protect their kids, but then you're just kind of like scared of everything. And so how do we help coach parents to not be like overly panicked? Like your kids, they have to learn to be online. They use Google Classroom. These are just realities of life, especially growing up in 2026. And so how do we coach parents to be looking out for these warning signs, to do all that without just creating like a kid that's just paralyzed by fear all the time? Because that'll do the opposite, sorts of trauma in a kid's life.
Yeah, I think, again, sharing that goal of, okay, we want you to be safe. I think sharing the goal too of we want to be able to trust you, and empowering them to make decisions where they don't feel like, oh, I have to keep everything a secret. And I think that's something important of education for parents of like, how can we talk to our kids about like, what does like secrets look like within friends, within relationships of like, oh, it's a different thing to have your best friend and you tell each other secrets, but what are some of these things that like, if you think that you have to hide it from mom and dad, if you think that you have to hide it from a teacher or a coach, like teaching them some of those things that it's like that gut reaction, right? Or that gut feeling that we always talk about of like, that it's just not right. I think educating them about that and helping them, again, help them express it to you of what makes you feel uncomfortable, what kind of things would, like helping them spot some of those warning signs, creating some of those boundaries and like family rules together, I think empowers them to hopefully want to follow them a little more. And again, being able to identify together like what creates a good friend, what creates a good romantic relationship, what creates a good coach-mentor relationship, because obviously we've seen that unfortunately be, there's been manipulation and assaults within that kind of like coach-teacher role with youth. So just being able to talk about those things together of like, hey, what's appropriate of someone who's in their 40s, they can care about you. And you don't want to create fear of like, oh, I'm not allowed to, this teacher really cares about what I'm doing. That must mean that they want to hurt me. Yeah. But just understanding of like, what do those boundaries look like? And what is maybe a red flag of, oh, this is a little bit inappropriate, and someone who's older than me or someone who has this role in my life shouldn't want to spend time with me in this way. So conversations like that of what's healthy, what's unhealthy, and also some of those feelings that someone could start to feel that would help them see, okay, something's not totally right. I'm not feeling safe. Like pressure and consent and things like that of how someone can be coerced into doing something. It's often not outright of you're going to do this for me. It's like that pulling them, like asking of almost like begging someone to do it and creating that feeling of like guilt. So I think that's obviously a long conversation to have with them of like, oh, if you feel pressured, like what does that even mean? Because someone might not know like, oh,
what it looks like.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, way more than, you talk about coaches and teachers and, we see all those things in the headlines, but way more often than should happen, churches are in the headlines for this kind of things, faith communities where people, usurp authority, they manipulate with religion, with God, they pull the God card and all of those kinds of things. And it's tragic. It happens almost anywhere, especially where there is opportunity for people to gain trust, have an upper hand, and be in a spot where I'm helping you. And when you add transcendence of God into it, it creates even more problems. But let's not talk about the negative things right now. That's just reality. But how can churches or faith communities like help protect in some of the, I guess, these kinds of ways?
So many things. Obviously giving opportunities for parents to come together to talk about like, oh, what are some real tangible online safety tips, maybe different platforms of blocking sites or limiting access to sites, just educating parents so that they feel equipped. So then they're not coming from a place of fear too, of like, oh, we're going to feel equipped to address some of these things. And obviously like having the community to talk about that. I wrote down some things. There's obviously so many different resources, but also churches, depending on what their like youth group services look like, there can be curriculum and things like that to provide to youth of like, oh, while our parents are being educated, we are too. And it's almost like, you go to Sunday school and you come back and you and your parents both learn the same thing in age appropriate ways. Yeah. So then we can have a conversation a little bit easier. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for youth to receive information in an age-appropriate way, parents to receive it in an appropriate way, and then open some of those conversations. And then with that, if there's people within the church who want to work with survivors or people who are at risk or people who have experienced trauma in other ways, obviously getting some training on just what that looks like to work with people and what does that look like if someone discloses something to you and maybe you're the first person that they tell that they've been abused or they've experienced something. Like what does that look like? How do I respond in a way that feels genuine, that connects them to resources that they need, and also helps the person who maybe is walking alongside them to have resources themselves, and realize too that they don't have to be the all-in-one, the everything, the person who answers every single call. So there's a lot of resources for churches on, trauma-informed care and what that looks like, or different screens. And really screens are just questions. And not that I think churches need here's a screening, but again, just giving people the language to ask questions in a different way, or even say, hey, I'm hearing that you said this thing and it sounds like this might have happened. Does that feel right to you? Giving people the language to have those conversations, because I think a lot of times we want to help. It's just we don't feel like we have the language or the resources to do so.
Yeah, and practically, I do think, any organization I'm a part of, when my dad was coaching my YMCA basketball team, I'm sure he just signed up and said, hey, I'm a parent, I'm going to be there. And now almost every organization and churches are hey, just practically, you need to have a background check. Those types of things need to happen. You don't just somebody that comes for 1 week and that's really enthusiastic about working with youth and they want to jump in. It's okay, we need to know who people are. And
having those safeguards for sure
are just big things that I think oftentimes, if you're a struggling small church or organization, or you're we don't have the budget, because those things cost, protecting our kids though, it costs. And you just have to do it.
Well, and I think building those policies in too of if you want to work with youth, great. Or again, just vulnerable people in general, but there are trainings, and typically someone who's willing to go through that will. And having policies of maybe it looks an adult isn't alone with youth. And practically, is that hard when you have a small team? Yes, but youth and adults should understand the purpose behind that. And a healthy person should hopefully be willing to. So I think there's a lot there that, again, being comfortable and being willing to be accountable to it, and telling youth too of again, even though it's people we love, we do not have to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations just because it's my uncle, aunt, youth pastor. If it's uncomfortable, that's you can still, say no to those things, even if it's someone that you feel close to.
And we talked a lot about the symptom and some of the warning signs, and also some things you can do to help. But I think one of the things we really haven't discussed is Lily Haven and what you do there and what the work is. And I wonder if you could start by maybe even sharing a story of someone who's maybe gone through the program and had a success story, obviously anonymously, but is there something you could share with us just so we kind of had an idea of what work is really going on at Lily Haven?
Yeah. Well, and I'll start by saying I didn't share any local statistics. Again, statistics can change. You can look on different websites and find different numbers, and that doesn't mean that one organization is lying. It's just, like I said, reports don't always happen. People don't necessarily make a report to the police every single time. But what I will say is locally, Project Harmony is the local child advocacy center, and they have a missing anti-trafficking and missing youth department. And so they paired those resources together to identify youth who are at risk and then work with youth who have confirmed instances of trafficking. And in 2024, they worked with, I want to say 58 youth who had been trafficked and 330 that they'd categorize as at risk. And so that's just a very tangible in our community. That's not the whole state of Nebraska. Douglas County and kind of surrounding. I know they work with some youth in Iowa as well. But for me, that's one that it's that's a very real, close to our community, 58 youth who have been trafficked. And so really at Lily Haven, our goal is to work with survivors, specifically teen girls, through essentially a specialized group home. And that's just because we know that people who have experienced this have really tangible needs and ongoing needs. And so we aim to fill that gap and provide holistic services for them. And so the group home model is really great because we get to address them long term. So we're working to open our group home. And really what that'll look like is we'll have house parents and then holistic activities. So things that address mental health, behavioral health, life skills, education, just all of those things. And ultimately, the first layer of it is so that they can come to a place where they have the space to emotionally heal and work through some of those things. But then the second layer is that we're addressing those things that put them at risk in the first place, right? So if they have physical, tangible needs, we're making sure they have the resources. We're making sure that they have primary care and they get connected to everything that they need for their physical health. So that they can go on and they're not as likely to be exploited in the future, and that they have the tools and the social support so that they can go on and live meaningful lives, whatever that looks like to them. And so we'll do activities like healthy relationships. What does that look like? Coping skills, and also like age appropriate for teens. So what do you like to do for fun? Like, what are some of those skills? Eventually partnering with places so that they maybe can job shadow or learn what it would look like to go to college. So very holistic in nature. And so we'll work with youth from places like Project Harmony or other child advocacy centers, youth in the foster care system, or youth who are coming from probation. And ultimately, the group home model is really special because we know that like the relationships are so impactful and there's so much learning that happens in relationships of like, how do you practice healthy relationships? How do you practice healthy conflict? If I grew up in a home where I witnessed domestic abuse and that was all that was normal to me, what does it look like to live in a space where we're working through conflict and we're eating dinner together and like practicing some of those real hard skills? And also that emotional healing has to happen through trusted relationships, which take a lot of time. And repetition too, of like all of those skills. Just because we have one hard conversation doesn't mean that everyone after that is going to be really easy. And so that's something that I'm excited for. We'll be following the teaching family model, and that just equips all of us as staff to see everyone that we work with from a strength-based lens, and also work with them from like a coaching perspective too, of like, okay, how do we equip you to work through and process your trauma and then also go on to be able to communicate what you need? So that's kind of broad overview of what we do. We work with some adults still in the community, but really our main focus right now is to open that group home.
Okay.
As far as a story, I have got to work with some really amazing people. I'd say one that stands out to me is a girl who, not from here, had a lot of those vulnerabilities, and it was through kind of like that romantic relationship that she was exploited. And when she came to us, she hadn't finished high school, really didn't have a lot of those needs. Like her family wasn't here, so she really had no support system. But she was just such a hard worker and really like had hope for the future and believed in the process of like putting in effort to get where she wanted to go. Definitely wasn't easy at time. There were some legal pieces in there that were hard for her to have to, relive telling the story and going through that. But I mean, she was so brave too, and just awesome that she had the support of people behind her of like, oh, we're here for you as you have to go through these things again. But she has a job. She's graduated high school. She's just really like crushing it. I mean, not all of the time, right? Like there's always going to be struggles, but I think what's cool too is that she'll still reach out of like, she knows that she has community to fall back on to ask for help, even if it's a ride or if it's help connecting to another service. So I just think it's been cool to see her grow through that and like have such joy.
That's great.
What is like I mean, someone's not going to just show up to Lily Haven and like, hey, I've been trafficked. Like what's kind of like that journey? I mean, there's probably not a typical one, but like what's the journey usually look like from being a victim, maybe a perpetrator was caught, however it happens, towards like the redemptive arc
like
that
the
happens?
process.
Yeah. What's that process look like? And then where along the lines does Lily Haven get involved in that process?
Yeah, you're right on it depends. And we're learning too, because having worked with adults in the past and now transitioning to youth that'll look a little bit different. And really, they can find us in a variety of ways. We don't require a referral from like a social service agency. I will anticipate that that's where most of them will come from. But if a youth, let's say, was living with their grandparents or aunt and uncle and maybe was running away from home and that's where trafficking happened, you know, their family member could refer them to us. But it could also be youth emergency services, Project Harmony, any youth serving organizations, so foster care, placement agencies, things like that. And so really they would connect with us. We would try and understand what their needs were, what kind of supports do they have already. Because some people might not need that residential care where they're with us for 6 to 12 to 18 months, whatever that might be. So understanding, do they really need to be with us? Does the youth understand that they would be living there? Like that's a different expectation and different structure, obviously. So we would work with whoever their team is, and that team who refers them, if they can stay involved, they will. So we really, again, want to make sure that their support system grows. It's not just exclusive to us. So they would make that referral. If they're a good fit, they would come and then really be in our program for, like I said, anywhere from 6 to 12 to 18 months, just depending on what their discharge goal is. And so what that looks like is, are they returning home or are they going to be moving on to a less structured program of what we'd call like transitional living? So that could be an apartment where they still have some support from another organization. Or is it moving out and going to college or moving out and living in an apartment all by themselves? And really that planning takes a long time. So like day one, we're going to be starting to have those conversations of what those goals are, because we know it takes a long time to make sure that we have all the resources and support in place so that they leave with a plan. And near the end of our program, our goal would be too that, like I mentioned earlier, they would be job shadowing or maybe volunteering, getting some of those skills, but also being paired with a mentor. So again, that they have just an excess of community, people pouring into them, and that when they leave our program, they're not going from 100 to 40 or, going from super structured to something not. And so we have a lot of community partners, for example, that can help furnish apartments for people who have been through programs like ours. So just making sure that we have all of those resources in place, make sure they have connection to healthcare, therapy, all of the things there.
So when you speak about
answered your question.
When you speak about resources, what are some of the things that are your biggest needs now? How can individuals and churches maybe pitch in to help?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously having a group home, there's like those tangible household items of dish soap, paper towels, laundry soap, and then toiletries, things for the girls there. We do have like a clothing little like boutique closet so that they can have some items, even things like gift cards so that when we want to do outings or they have a birthday, things like that we can go celebrate them and give them different experiences. We also, with some of our like program alumni, a lot of times we'll still help them with transportation. So even things like an Uber gift card of like, if someone reaches out and they're like, hey, I missed the bus or the bus is running late and I'm trying to get to my job, just knowing, again, making sure that they don't have those barriers. So a lot of different tangible items that can always be of use. In the future, there will be a need for volunteers, like I said, who want to serve in like a mentorship role or want to do little projects around the house. And then behind the scenes volunteers too, of whether that be event planning or admin work or all sorts of things. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I guess this is kind of a side question, but how many individuals are you usually working with at one time? Does it vary quite a bit, or? Yeah,
it can vary because sometimes people will reach out and things will be chaotic and then you won't hear from them and they'll get connected again. As far as when we open the group home, the first 6 months to a year, I'll anticipate that we'll start with 3 girls at a time. And that's just to make sure that we have all the things that they need to be connected to. And that they have that individualized care planning, right? So a lot that goes into it, providing holistic programming, and will expand as time goes on within being able to have more people within the house. But then from that community-based standpoint, we're able to serve a lot more of getting connected to other programs, working on some different support groups and partnering with some other nonprofits to make sure that we're still kind of doing outreach, providing support groups and healthy relationship groups. So it definitely can vary.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
If someone wants to, if someone's listening to this and they piques their curiosity, they want to support more or just find out more about the organization, figure out, hey, I'd like to donate an Uber gift card, or I'd like to, monthly support, whatever. What is how do people figure out where you're at? You have a web, I'm assuming you have a website, it's 2026, but how do they figure that out? How do they contact any of those things?
Yeah. So lilyhaven.org is our website. We're on social media as well. Something that I'll plug is on our website, we do have a resource page. So if you're interested in just learning more or learning about other organizations that might support survivors in a different way, because there really is a spectrum of services that people would need, whether that be legal help or if that be getting connected to a food bank, whatever it is. So a lot of information on our resource page. If you want to learn more about trafficking, like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they have a good page on child trafficking, and there's a lot of trainings out there. Our website and social media, we try and keep up to date with the needs that we have. You can donate on there. You can fill out our volunteer form. We keep our events up to date on there. So really our website, social media, have a newsletter, but people could reach out anytime. Yeah.
Oh, great. Is there, as we wrap things up here, is there anything that you feel you didn't get to share, or something that even if it's just something as, specific as what gives you hope in this process or anything like that?
Yeah, I think that's something I do try and touch on is when I tell people what I do, the reaction can be, oh my gosh, that must be really depressing, really hard. I don't know how you do it. And not to dismiss that, obviously, we work in a really hard topic. I never want to dismiss it as if it's not as horrible as it is, right? Yeah. But I get to work with people on the other side of it and see a lot of growth and hopefully instill some of that hope in them too. And so, it's a challenging topic, but it's not as scary maybe as some people would think, or maybe even when I went into it, right? Feeling like, what do I have to bring to the table to people who have gone through something so hard? But really, it's relationship building. It's just like when you meet a friend and you get to learn about their life and you learn more about them day by day, bit by bit. It happens a lot more naturally than I think people might expect. And so it's a privilege to get to be involved in someone's life in that way. To be trusted with that. And at the same time, it's we're not there for them forever. We're just a piece of their story and a piece of hopefully their growth. But we do get to see just, a lot of cool things. And sometimes it takes a long time and you don't see it immediately. But then you get to see a lot of cool stories and be involved in a lot of great things. And I think it's been cool to me to see so many people from the community, from every industry, who's interested in helping.
Wow.
And so I feel encouraged by that too, that Omaha specifically is really great and people really want to support, people want to learn. And that's been really encouraging.
Yeah. So. Well, and I suppose to see people kind of at their most hopeless coming into a situation at the front end of this, and then having the experience you have, knowing what awaits them on the other side. And then, hey, this may seem impossible right now, but there is hope for you, and that's really encouraging. So
to get to plant seeds and be with them and just see the growth it's really cool.
Well, Sarina, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks
really
for having
appreciate
me.
it. Glad you're here. I think a lot of people probably learned a lot, or maybe we piqued their curiosity about this organization and how they can pitch in beyond just posting a hashtag or something like that, but tangible ways to help out. And if you're listening right now and you have any questions or concerns, you can always reach out to us on social media. Our Instagram and TikTok account are at CCCOMA Podcast, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org, or leave us a voicemail at 402-885-9930. But until next time, we'll talk to you then.